Here's something that gets buried in almost every history book about World War II. By 1944, German soldiers on the front lines were stealing American vehicles, repainting them with German crosses, and fighting to keep them. Not tanks. Not artillery. Not anything that fired a shell. A small, open-top quarter-ton truck that the German propaganda machine had publicly mocked as a toy car built by an unserious nation. They were stealing Jeeps. And the fact that they couldn't stop stealing them tells you more about why Germany lost the war than almost anything else you'll ever read. Eisenhower, the man who commanded every Allied soldier in Europe, sat down after the war and listed the 4 pieces of equipment he believed were most vital to the victory. One of them was the Jeep. And then he wrote something that almost nobody remembers. He noted that none of the 4 were designed for combat. The weapon that helped win the biggest war in human history wasn't supposed to be a weapon at all. And the story of how it got built, what it did, and why the losing side spent the last years of the war desperately trying to steal as many of them as possible, is one of the strangest and most overlooked stories of the entire conflict. In the summer of 1939, the United States Army held what it proudly called the largest peacetime military exercise in American history, about 52,000 troops. Mock artillery barrages simulated attacks across the rolling farmland around Plattsburgh, New York, and along every dirt road in the exercise area, columns of horses and motorcycles trying to do what armies had been trying to do since the Civil War: move men, orders, and weapons across broken ground faster than the enemy could react. It wasn't working. The horses were too slow and ate too much. The motorcycles fell over in the mud, snapped their riders' legs, and couldn't climb a moderate hill with 2 men aboard. The Model T Ford, which the Army had been using as a staff car since the First World War, was a road vehicle. Take it off the pavement and into a plowed field, and it became a tractor without traction. The man watching all of this with the most carefully concealed alarm was a 58-year-old officer named George Marshall, who would, on the very day Germany invaded Poland, the 1st of September, 1939, take the oath of office as the new Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Marshall had served in the muddy fields of France in 1918. He had watched what mud did to men and to messages. He had spent years pushing a resistant Congress for a small, fast, 4-wheel drive scout vehicle that could go where horses couldn't and motorcycles dared not. He had been ignored every time. Now, Poland was burning. France would be next, and Marshall knew it. Whatever he was going to do about the mobility problem, he was going to have to do it fast. But what happened next was so chaotic, so rushed, and so unfair to the men who actually built the thing, that it almost didn't happen at all. On the 11th of July, 1940, 2 weeks after France surrendered, the US Army Quartermaster Corps sent a set of vehicle specifications to 135 American automobile manufacturers. The terms were almost cruel. 4-wheel drive, empty weight no greater than 1,300 pounds, a payload of 660 pounds, an engine producing at least 85 foot-pounds of torque, a fold-down windshield, a speed range from 3 to 50 miles per hour, a rear bench for 3 soldiers, and a machine gun mount. Bids were due in 11 days. A working prototype was considered a physical impossibility and a bureaucratic joke. 135 companies that received those specs, 133 of them threw the document in the trash. The deadline was considered a physical impossibility and a bureaucratic joke. Only 2 companies responded. One was Willys Overland of Toledo, Ohio. The other was a tiny, near-bankrupt operation in Butler, Pennsylvania, called the American Bantam Car Company, which had been building small European-style economy cars and was so close to collapse that its main engineering staff had already been let go. Bantam had no engineers, no money, and 11 days to submit a complete bid with blueprints, cost estimates, and supplier lists. What they did have was a phone number. They called a freelance engineer in Detroit named Carl Knight Probst. Probst was 56 years old. He'd been building automobiles since the early years of the century. He was between jobs and short on cash. Bantam's president called him and asked for help. Probst said no. Bantam pleaded. Probst still said no. Then William Knudsen, recently pulled from the presidency of General Motors to run all army procurement, got on the phone personally and told Probst that the country needed him. Probst got in his car and drove east. By the time he walked into Bantam's nearly empty drafting room and rolled up his sleeves, he had less than a week to design a vehicle from scratch. He worked through Wednesday night. He worked through Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the 19th of July, 1940, he had completed the basic layout drawings for what would, within a year, be called the Jeep. He took Friday evening off. He went to the movies. On Saturday and Sunday, he finalized the cost calculations and the supplier specifications. On Monday morning, he and Bantam's plant manager piled the documents into a car and drove them to the Army's test center at Camp Holabird in Baltimore. Probst had laid out the basic design in 2 days. He'd finished the entire bid package in 5. The finished prototype was driven from Butler, Pennsylvania to Camp Holabird under its own power on the 23rd of September, 1940, roughly 250 miles, because Bantam couldn't afford to ship it. It pulled through the gate 30 minutes before the deadline. And then something happened that nobody involved ever quite forgave. The Army accepted Bantam's design. They ran it through brutal testing and declared it the best candidate in the competition. And then, citing concerns that tiny Bantam couldn't possibly produce vehicles in the quantities a world war would require, they handed Bantam's blueprints to Willys and Ford and ordered both companies to build their own versions based on the same design. The Army argued that by contract, the drawings now belonged to the government. Karl Probst was furious, and there was nothing he could do about it. Willys and Ford improved the design. Willys had something extraordinary ready. An engine their engineering vice president, a man called Barney Roos, had spent 2 years rebuilding from an old 4-cylinder into a 60-horsepower unit Willys called the Go Devil. Roos had run that engine flat out on a dynamometer for 100 hours without a failure. The engine it replaced had broken at 22. The Go Devil was, simply, the finest small military engine in the world. The Army mandated that both Willys and Ford use it. Ford, in turn, contributed the now iconic stamped steel grille with vertical slats, the visual signature of the Jeep that's been on every version of the vehicle ever since. By July of 1941, the Army had standardized the design. Willys built it as the Model MB. Ford built the same vehicle, with parts interchangeable down to the last bolt, as the GPW. By the time the war ended in 1945, the two factories had produced about 647,000 Jeeps between them. Willys made roughly 362,000. Ford made roughly 280,000. American Bantam, the company that had actually invented it, built 2,675 before being pushed entirely out of the picture. They survived the war making trailers for the Jeeps to tow. They never returned to building cars. They declared bankruptcy in 1950 and were absorbed by a steel company 6 years later. Karl Probst, the man who designed the thing in 5 days, never got rich from it. He died in his Dayton, Ohio home in August 1963 at the age of 79 after a long battle with cancer, nearly forgotten outside the small circle of Jeep historians who knew what he had actually done. But the vehicle he had sketched in that empty Pennsylvania drafting room was about to do something nobody had anticipated. And the first place it happened was a stretch of desert in eastern Egypt, in the hands of a 26-year-old Scotsman who immediately understood that the Army had accidentally built something far more dangerous than a staff car. David Stirling had attended Cambridge before being sent down for an accumulation of student offenses, and had recently been recovering from injuries sustained in an experimental parachute jump that nearly killed him. He had convinced his superiors in Cairo, against fierce resistance from officers who despised the concept of private armies, that small teams of trained men attacking German airfields by surprise could destroy more enemy aircraft on the ground than the Royal Air Force could destroy in the air. In the early months, the SAS had relied on heavy Chevrolet trucks to reach their targets, dismounting on foot to plant explosives, and walking back out. It worked, but it was slow, and as German airfield security tightened, it was becoming more dangerous with every raid. In early 1942, Stirling received a small consignment of Jeeps, the first to reach his unit. He looked at them and understood immediately what they were. Not transport, a weapon system. He stripped them down, cut off the windshields, removed the bumpers, He bolted Vickers K aircraft machine guns, 4 per Jeep, to the front and rear mounts. Each gun was capable of firing between 950 and 1,200 rounds per minute. He loaded the back of each vehicle with jerry cans of fuel, water condensers, ammunition, and explosives. On the night of the 26th of July, 1942, 18 of these modified Jeeps, under Stirling's personal command, crossed 50 miles of open desert to a Luftwaffe airfield called Sidi Hanesh, the staging base for the bombers and transport aircraft supplying Rommel's Afrika Korps. The 18 Jeeps drove onto the field in a V formation, headlights off, navigating by stars, under the guidance of a navigator named Mike Sadler. When Stirling fired a green flare, all 18 vehicles opened fire simultaneously with 72 machine guns. They drove the full length of the airfield in formation, raking parked aircraft with tracer fire. In approximately 15 minutes, they destroyed or damaged around 37 Axis aircraft. They lost 1 man at the airfield itself, and 1 Jeep disabled. In the 15 months between the time Stirling first put a Vickers gun on a Jeep and the day he was captured in Tunisia in January 1943, the SAS destroyed more than 250 Axis aircraft on the ground in North Africa, alongside fuel dumps, supply depots, and miles of telephone line. By the regiment's own count, that figure exceeded what the Royal Air Force destroyed on the ground in the same theater over the same period. Stirling himself, caught sleeping in a Tunisian ravine, was passed up the German chain of custody until he ended up in Colditz Castle, where he remained until liberation. He had rewritten the rules of special operations warfare using a vehicle that the Army Quartermaster Corps had originally classified as a scout car, but what the Germans were watching from the other side of the wire was something they didn't have a category for. And the reason they didn't have a category for it came down to a single, fundamental difference in engineering philosophy. The Germans had their own light vehicle, the Kübelwagen, designed by Ferdinand Porsche himself, elegant, comfortable, well-engineered, and built on a Volkswagen platform. American engineers who tested a captured example in 1943 noted that the bucket seats were genuinely comfortable, and the construction was impressive. They also noted something else. The Kübelwagen had 2-wheel drive. Its air-cooled engine produced about 24 to 25 horsepower. It was, at its core, a civilian passenger car adapted for military service. The Jeep was a military vehicle from the first pencil stroke. 4-wheel drive that could be engaged on the move. A Go Devil engine producing 60 horsepower. It could ford about 18 inches of water without any preparation, climb steep grades, tow a trailer carrying nearly half its own weight, and run for days at full load without mechanical failure. It could be repaired by any soldier with a wrench, a hammer, and a basic understanding of how engines worked. The verdict American engineers put in print in March 1945 was blunt. The Volkswagen is inferior in every way except the comfort of its seating. They weren't being arrogant. They were describing 2 entirely different design philosophies. The German philosophy was to build a beautiful, finely engineered object. The American philosophy was to build a tool that any soldier could use to do any job in any place without waiting for permission. And the consequences of that difference showed up in a number that almost nobody talks about. Germany entered the Second World War in 1939 with about 514,000 horses on its military rolls. By the start of the Soviet campaign in 1941, that number had grown to roughly 750,000. By February of 1945, with German factories failing under Allied bombing, the Wehrmacht was using approximately 1.2 million horses. Across the entire war, Germany employed something in the range of 2.75 million horses, more than it had used in the First World War. The image most people carry of the German military, the panzer divisions crashing across European borders in a thunder of mechanized power, was true of a small, elite sliver at the front edge of the force. Behind that edge, the bulk of the German army marched the way armies had marched since Caesar, on its own feet, with a horse pulling the wagon. The American army of 1944 didn't have that problem, and what those American soldiers did with the vehicle that solved it, nobody in Detroit or Toledo had planned for. The most important thing about the Jeep wasn't what it was when it left the factory. It was what it became once it reached the front. Welded steel brackets on the rear turned it into a stretcher carrier that could evacuate 2 wounded men simultaneously under fire. a pair of pipes bolted to the front turned it into a wire cutter capable of slicing through German telephone lines along the Normandy hedgerows. Steel rails across the floor turned it into a railway maintenance vehicle that could run on captured French train tracks. A pintle mount on the rear seat turned it into a .50 caliber heavy machine gun platform. A canvas top and a bent pipe frame turned it into a field ambulance. A heavy-duty winch on the front bumper made it a recovery vehicle for trucks that had sunk in the mud. On the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, where heavier trucks couldn't move at all, jeeps sank to their axles and kept driving, carrying wounded Marines off the beaches in numbers the medical evacuation plans hadn't anticipated. On the Ledo Road in Burma, jeeps carried medical supplies and ammunition up jungle trails that the British had officially concluded were impassable in monsoon season. None of these modifications were designed in Detroit. Every single one of them was designed in the field by sergeants, corporals, and privates with welding torches and salvaged parts and the same mechanical instinct that had once turned Henry Ford's Model T into 1,000 different farm tools across the American Midwest. The Wehrmacht didn't work that way. The German army of 1943 was built on the assumption that engineering excellence came from above, from men with doctorates in offices in Kassel and Stuttgart. The Tiger tank was a masterpiece of metallurgy, designed by specialists and understood by specialists. The American Army of 1943 was, by that standard, a far less elegant institution. But it had a culture in which the man holding the wrench was assumed to know something the man holding the blueprint didn't. And improvising on official equipment wasn't a violation. It was the entire point. The Jeep was the perfect vehicle for that culture. Simple enough that any farmer's son who had taken apart a Model A Ford could understand it within hours. Rugged enough that those same hands couldn't break it. Small enough that 6 men could lift it free of a ditch by hand. The American died-of-wounds rate fell from approximately 8% in the First World War to approximately 4% in the Second. That improvement came from sulfur drugs, plasma, penicillin, and forward surgical hospitals. But the chain that connected a wounded man to a surgeon started with a Jeep driving through artillery fire with a red cross painted on a canvas top. And the airborne version of what the Jeep could do might be the most staggering detail of all. To fit a Jeep through the side door of a glider, ground crews stripped off the windshield, the bumper ends, the hand grips, and anything not strictly required. Lashed to the glider floor with steel cables, these stripped vehicles flew into combat behind enemy lines. At Arnhem in September 1944, British glider units landed jeeps and used them to tow 6-pounder anti-tank guns through city streets. More than 200 jeeps came in with the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment alone during the Rhine crossing in March 1945. The war correspondent Ernie Pyle, who rode in jeeps from North Africa to Italy to France until he was killed by a Japanese machine gun in April 1945, described the vehicle in a dispatch from 1943 in terms that no engineer who designed it ever quite matched. He said it did everything. It went everywhere. It was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat. He noted that it constantly carried twice what it was designed for and kept going. That description holds up against everything the documents show. But the strangest confirmation of what the Jeep actually meant didn't come from the men using it. It came from the men trying to stop them. In October of 1944, with the war clearly turning against Germany, Hitler summoned a Waffen-SS lieutenant colonel named Otto Skorzeny to his Wolfslair headquarters in East Prussia. Skorzeny had recently been given propaganda credit for the glider raid that freed Mussolini from a mountaintop hotel, though the operation had actually been planned and led by a Luftwaffe officer named Harold Morse. Hitler now had a more delicate task. He wanted Skorzeny to assemble a brigade of English-speaking German soldiers, dress them in American uniforms, equip them with American vehicles, and send them through Allied lines in the opening hours of the Ardennes offensive. Their mission: seize bridges over the Meuse River, cut telephone lines, redirect traffic, and create paralyzing confusion in the American rear. The operation was called Greif, German for Griffin. Skorzeny submitted his requirements. He requested 15 captured tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and 100 American jeeps. He received approximately 2 functioning Sherman tanks, He received about 30 jeeps and 15 trucks. The remainder he had to fabricate by painting German vehicles olive drab and stenciling white stars on them. Of roughly 2,500 volunteers screened for fluent English, Skorzeny found about 10 who spoke perfect American English with authentic idiom. Another 30 or 40 spoke serviceable English without slang. The rest were marginal. In his post-war memoir, Skorzeny wrote that the situation was, in his own words, terrifying. But the detail that matters is the one he never had to explain. Why jeeps? Skorzeny had Kübelwagens available in the tens of thousands. German production had built about 50,000 of them. He didn't use a single one. He specifically needed the captured American jeeps because he and every one of his men understood exactly what every American military police officer at every checkpoint understood, that a jeep would be waved through without hesitation in a way that nothing else would be. The tactical result of Operation Greif was largely a failure. Most of Skorzeny's commandos never crossed the front line. The strategic result was something else entirely. American sentries across the entire Ardennes front began stopping every jeep they didn't recognize and demanding answers to questions about baseball, state capitals, and cartoon characters. General Omar Bradley was briefly detained at his own checkpoint. He correctly answered that the capital of Illinois was Springfield, but the military police officer who stopped him thought the capital was Chicago. General Eisenhower, after intelligence reports suggested Skorzeny's commandos might be targeting him for elimination, was effectively confined to his Versailles headquarters for several days. During Christmas of 1944, a handful of German commandos in stolen jeeps came closer to paralyzing the entire Allied command structure than whole German divisions did in the same offensive. Roughly 18 of Skorzeny's men were captured in American uniforms and executed by firing squad. The first 3 were shot on the 23rd of December 1944, 2 days before Christmas. Skorzeny himself survived the war, was tried at Dachau, and was acquitted in part on the testimony of a former British agent who confirmed that Allied special forces had themselves considered wearing enemy uniforms. He lived another 28 years. The captured jeep, the vehicle his own army couldn't produce and couldn't match, was the operational heart of the most ambitious German commando mission of the war. That says something the German memoirs never quite said out loud. After the war, the United States Army Historical Division did something no military in history had attempted on quite this scale. They sat down with the surviving senior officers of the German army and asked them, systematically and in writing, what they had thought about the war in real time. The program produced about 2,500 manuscripts, many of which now sit in the National Archives in Maryland. In those documents, German generals blamed Hitler, the weather, the bombing, and the Russians. They rarely named the jeep directly. They didn't need to. They described its consequences. The speed at which American units could shift their weight from one sector to another. The depth at which American reconnaissance penetrated German lines before being detected. The rate at which American casualties were evacuated, treated, and in many cases returned to combat. The relentless pressure that American forward elements could maintain on a battered German line because supply never stopped reaching them. Every one of those things, on the ground, came back to the small four-wheel drive truck that moved everything an American battalion needed at a speed no German equivalent could match. In an American infantry battalion, communication wire could be laid, casualties evacuated, reconnaissance conducted, and forward elements resupplied simultaneously, because each of those tasks was being handled by a separate jeep moving on a separate axis. A German battalion attempting the same tasks had to do them one at a time, in many cases on foot or with horse-drawn carts. Eisenhower put it plainly in his 1948 memoir, the C-47 transport aircraft. And then he added the line that changes everything. None of them was designed for combat. The most consequential American equipment of the Second World War was not the equipment that fired the bullets. It was the equipment that put the men with the bullets where the bullets needed to be. At peak production, the Willys plant in Toledo rolled a finished Jeep off the line every 80 seconds. About 647,000 were built in total. Around 50,000 went to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where Russian troops called them the Willys and used them as command vehicles all the way to Berlin. Tens of thousands went to the British, the Free French, and the Chinese. Karl Probst, who made the whole thing possible in 5 days in an empty drafting room, died nearly forgotten. Bantam, the company that built the first prototype, was crushed out of the business by the same army contracts it had won. David Stirling, who put a Vickers gun on a Jeep in the Egyptian desert and changed special operations forever, spent the final years of the war in a German prison camp. Ernie Pyle, who loved the Jeep more than any piece of equipment in the American arsenal, was killed by a Japanese machine gun on a small island in the Pacific in April 1945. Most of the original 647,000 Jeeps are scrap metal now. The ones that survived are collector's items sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars. The Wehrmacht's behavior on the battlefield, capturing the Jeep, repainting it with German crosses, building their most ambitious commando operation of the war around stolen examples of it, running a war that depended on 1.2 million horses because they never built a comparable vehicle, said everything the German memoirs never quite said in plain language. They couldn't match it. They couldn't match what it let every American soldier do. By the end, they were trying as hard as they could to use it themselves. The Jeep didn't win battles. It let everything else win battles. That was Eisenhower's verdict, and it's the one that holds up best against every document, every manuscript, and every repainted German cross on a stolen American quarter-ton truck that has ever turned up in a wartime photograph. The men who built it and drove it and bled in it are mostly gone now. The vehicle is the closest thing they have to a monument. And the monument is still on the road.